Now is the moment in the night when I will introduce our keynote speaker, Representative Scott Odenbach. Mr. Odenbach was elected to the South Dakota House of Representatives in 2020 to represent District 31, comprising all of Lawrence County. He serves on the Education and Judiciary Committees. He is chairman of the 2021 Teacher Compensation Review Board and was a member of the Special Summer Study Committee on Workforce Housing. A fifth-generation South Dakotan who grew up in Eureka, Scott and his wife Laura, who's here tonight, have been married since 1995 and they have 3 children. Scott earned a Bachelor of Science degree from South Dakota State University in 1995 and a Juris Doctorate from the University of South Dakota School of Law in 2001. He has practiced law in Spearfish since 2006, specializing in business, estate, and real property law. I had to double check that. I thought maybe it was a mistake, just property law, but real property law is what it is.
Personal property.
Real property, all right. Scott is also the managing broker of Liberty Tree Properties real estate firm in Spearfish. And please join me in welcoming Scott with a warm round of applause.
Move that Constitution.
All right, well, it's great to see all of you here. Thanks for being here. Thanks for coming tonight. I want to first thank Professor Drummond for spearheading this idea, for continuing to check in on me over the last few months and really making me make this happen. I want to thank President Nichols for her leadership in letting us have an event like this here at Black Hills State University. And I just want to say on my own behalf, welcome to the first annual BHSU Civics Day. We heard such a great presentation that he gave, and hearing from these young people. I've been involved in the We the People program in the past, and it is truly just amazing I think of myself as a young person, and I was miles away from where some of these kids are, so that's a great program we should look at in the future. I'm really excited to be speaking here tonight. This idea, this event is something I've been pushing for a few years now. I want to make Black Hills State in the future maybe the center of where we have a civic education and appreciation for Western civilization. So I want this to continue and go on into the future. So there's a little extra pressure on me. I don't want to bore anybody to death, and then we don't have a second annual Civics Day next year. So as you can see, tonight's talk is entitled Restoring the Constitutional Republic, How to End the Zero-Sum Game of Politics. It's meant to address how, if our American civic life is going to remain civil, we need to hold on to our roots as a constitutional republic and teach it to the next generation. I'm going to address 3 main points tonight. The first is the difference between a pure democracy and a republic. The second, why we should teach this in American-style civics. And the third, how moral relativism has impacted our government and our elections. Let's first consider the differences between a pure democracy and a constitutional republic in the context of what we say as leaders and what we teach our kids, and in the context of considering what is the best system to secure the rights of all and avoid our nation coming apart at the seams over the next few years. I think it's an important topic, as we so often hear many people refer to our democracy, either intentionally or unintentionally, but either way I think misrepresenting the kind of government we actually have here in America. I did some research into that term. I hear it so much. Just a few examples. Former presidential candidate in a recent Financial Times interview said, quote, "We are standing on the precipice of losing our democracy." There's an organization branding itself as a law and public policy institute. Its website's headlined, "Our democracy is in crisis." A recent bill introduced in the U.S. Senate back in May was entitled Sustaining Our Democracy Act. I could go on, but you get the point. Technically, all these references are incorrect, and the difference matters. The language we use matters. What we teach the next generation matters. But why does it matter? Why make a big deal out of it? Well, there's an old story about 3 people in a lifeboat adrift at sea and desperately short on water. It's a democracy, so the 2 biggest guys vote to throw the 3rd person overboard. The 2 in the majority love the decision, the guy in the ocean not so much. I think this story encapsulates much of what lies behind the panic partisanship that has overtaken today's politics. The further we move away from a constitutional system where the rights of the minority are guaranteed no matter who is in charge, the closer we get to the tyranny of the majority, which was so feared by the founders of our country, where the losers in our elections begin to fear being thrown out of the lifeboat. That's the definition of a zero-sum game, the term I used in the title of this talk tonight. A zero-sum game is a system where any advantage for one side is equal to an equivalent loss for the other. Frankly, that scares people. Now, some people are merely ignorant of our history. Unfortunately, others would very much like to govern and use the term, they would like to govern, without restraints. And they use the term our democracy to promote an agenda of governing outside of pesky constitutional restraints, especially during an emergency. This is concerning because in an ever more pluralistic country with essentially no immigration enforcement as we see today, where we're absorbing millions of new arrivals from other nations each year who have no concept of our constitutional traditions, how do you create a system that holds civil society together, where everyone is free but plays by the same set of rules? Could you have a baseball game if one team says 3 strikes and you're out and the other insists it's 4? In a recent poll, 43% of the respondents said they expect the country to have a civil war in the next 10 years. 43%. It reminds me of what Boston College professor Peter Kreeft once wrote. He said, when you are edging closer and closer to the abyss, the most progressive direction is backwards. Watch the news. By almost any measure, we are edging closer and closer to the abyss, and we need to take a step back. Because if we throw away the Republican, small r, rule of law, if we're just a pure democracy where politics is a winner-take-all game, then people will do anything to preserve their rights. That's dangerous. And that's where we find ourselves if you think of the 43% of the people in those poll results. And that's the zero-sum game I'm talking about. Now, our nation's founders were very wise, and they knew this could happen. They knew enough history, mostly the history of bad government and tyranny, to understand that if we want to secure people's life, liberty, and happiness, we didn't want to create a pure democracy. In Federalist number 10, James Madison compared a pure democracy where each citizen votes directly for laws that are then passed to a republic, where the citizens elect their representatives who then enact laws, all of which must be consistent with the constitutional rights afforded equally to all citizens. The rights of minorities are protected, and there is separation of powers. Consider these other points. Article 4, Section 4 of our Constitution says, the United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government. The word democracy does not appear in either the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution. If you say the Pledge of Allegiance, what do you say? And to the republic for which it stands. As he left the Constitutional Convention of 1787, Ben Franklin was asked, well, doctor, what have we got, a republic or a monarchy? And he said, a republic, if you can keep it. The fact is, this country was designed so we all could live under the rule of law rather than the rule of men, which they call the tyranny of the majority. As Thomas Jefferson wrote in his Kentucky Resolution of 1787, he said, in questions of power then, let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution. So having considered what kind of system America was created to be, I want to turn to the need to correctly teach civics to the next generation. So first, let's ask, what is civics anyway? A lot of people merely hear that term and start to yawn. But ask yourself, I thought of this as I was writing this speech. In America, when we say we've got to do a better job of teaching our kids civics, what does that mean? And how does that compare to what other countries may teach their kids in a course labeled civics? Now, according to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, civics was a good definition I found. I looked up many. They define it in part as, quote, in its broadest definition, civic education means all the processes that affect people's beliefs, commitments, capabilities, and actions as members or prospective members of communities. Civic education need not be intentional or deliberate. Institutions and communities transmit values and norms without meaning to, unquote. So to put it another way, civic education is the process by which we transmit our civilization to the next generation, our values and norms, how we shall live together in society, the principles for which our soldiers fought and died. And when we teach civics here in America, we should strive to teach the truth about what kind of system America was created to be, a constitutional republic, and how we should continue that system on into the future. If we don't, we're just teaching activism or revolution, but we're not teaching civics in the classic American sense. The teaching of civics, for example, say in Red China or Cuba, Venezuela, or 1930s Russia or Germany, means something wholly different than it does in America, or at least it should. Now, most educators and leaders today agree that if we do not again start doing a great job of teaching American civics to our young people, that lessons from history show us they will be more apt to fall prey to demagogues or support people with the easy answers. Because let's be honest, the system we have with concepts like the rule of law, trial by jury, due process, minority rights, it's complicated, as those We the People kids would tell you. And it doesn't lend itself to simplistic answers to complex problems. It really only works if you've been taught it from an early age and appreciate what we have. We can see that happening now, this lack of teaching too often. People will scream loudly for their rights, but what about their corresponding responsibilities? To live as good citizens, work hard, and partake in our representative form of government. But how can they participate if they don't even understand? To paraphrase Jefferson, he said, if a nation wants to be ignorant and free, it wants what never was and will never be. Which leads to my final point, which is that if we have no generally accepted standards of right and wrong, besides the iron will of the majority, history shows that all kinds of bad things can and will happen. I don't think a speech exploring the potential hazards to your rights and mine of unrestrained majority rule would be complete without discussing this issue. In his essay, The Advancement of Learning, English philosopher Francis Bacon warned that civic education should be preceded by religious and moral education, so that those who judge policy will not be under the influence of moral relativism. So what is moral relativism? Stated simply, it's the belief that there are no universal moral principles, that each person decides what the truth is for himself. But any system of government that has a criminal and civil law code is by definition imposing a system of morality and values. The South Dakota statutes that line the shelf in my office downtown are the written record of the imposition by our duly elected leaders of a particular moral outlook. There's no such thing as a nation embracing moral relativism will also protect the state of freedom and security for peaceful people. We need the law, and it must be based on something, because we either have the rule of law or the rule of the jungle. Consider the problems facing America today. What is the root cause? Maybe it's that we don't even agree on what is truth anymore. That's moral relativism. And in a pure democracy, when an election means whoever wins can rule, then for the minority, i.e. anybody who loses the election, that means your entire lifestyle or your very life may be on the line as the majority makes up the rules as they go along. That turns every election into a zero-sum game. And that's, I'm afraid, what we're seeing too often in America today. America's #1 strength is her freedom. Our stable democratic system that combines majority rule with protections for minority rights under a Republican form of government forms the foundation of our success, and it's what draws people from all nations to come here. In 1885, it drew my great-great-grandfather, Johannes Odenbach. He was a German living in Russia, and he emigrated from there and homesteaded north of Eureka in then Dakota Territory. Thank God he did. When you watch the news today in Russia or the last 120 years, you could be who you want to be in America, but our leaders must govern under the rule of law so that your pursuit of happiness doesn't infringe upon the rights of others. Because like it or not, we're all in this boat together. The pressing question in 2022 is it going to stay afloat or come apart and sink as we toss one another overboard in billion-dollar winner-take-all elections, with the victors eager to ignore constitutional restraints? And more than just stay afloat, we must ask, are we headed somewhere together, united by, if not a common purpose, at least the same set of rules? I think that we as leaders have a responsibility to the next generation and to all the American blood that was shed since 1776 to defend, with truth, the best system on earth ever set up to secure the life and liberty for the most people. I hope you will think about these things the next time you hear someone talk about our democracy, remembering to continue the work of transmitting our American civics, the truth about our constitutional republic, to the next generation. My hope is that Civics Day can play a part in that by becoming a great tradition here at BHSU, serving as an example for the rest of the state as we prioritize the critical task of rightly educating the next generation of leaders at this critical time. Because as Emerson wrote, he said, the true test of civilization is not the census, nor the size of cities, nor the crops, no, but the kind of man the country turns out. Thank you for coming tonight, for considering all these points.